support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Wow. Episode 45.
That went a little bit seamless. Only 46 episodes into it.
Yeah, we're getting it down. We really are. Welcome to Down South Anomalies. And this is the episode, Is It Written in the Stars? And we've got a couple of extraordinary guests.
We do.
One of them has come back to us for the second time, but my God, I want to live with this lady. She is so generous of spirit, such a beautiful person. Of course, every week we have to say we are broadcasting on stolen land.
Yep.
More important now than ever, the voice. Just say yes. Let's not debate that point. Otherwise, I think we're all going to end up on Nauru. It's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We do our respect and appreciation for elders past, present, and emerging. Tonight, we're going to look into the world Aspasia. And of course, my name is Jay Katz.
Yep.
We're going to look into the world of astrology, something I'm completely naive about. But we were speaking before. When I first met you nearly 33 years ago, our anniversary coming up we met, but our anniversary is coming up when?
The 21st, actually the 22nd, the day I leave on my cruise on my own.
Departing from me again to go on a cruise with a girlfriend. What's going on there? And you
nothing.
And you come from Lesbos, and so you are original lesbian. What are you doing to me?
Nothing. I'm doing nothing to you.
But, you know, we were stating before, just before we got this podcast together, that I was quite amazed at the mythical nature of especially your father in the community.
Oh, right.
Greece,
Yeah.
That he had a bit of warlock powers.
Well, he had something,
would
who
assist
knows,
people.
Delusion.
And you know what the one thing is?
What?
There was a lot of derision about that, but I actually saw it as an effective tool after a while.
absolutely.
I was a bit shocked by the ram's head painted silver over the
garage.
Yeah,
I know. But
then I saw people come to him
community,
and leave.
Community.
So uplifting.
Yeah.
It was astounding. So who we have to present into Down South Anomalies episode 46 now is the incredible Sheryl Gottschall.
That's right.
From U.F.O Research Queensland and
Baboula, that's right. So I'm going to bring these
two astounding ladies in.
And there we go. Look at us, 3 on the screen. I love it.
The Holy Trinity. Listen, thank you both so much for your valuable time. We truly appreciate it, and your knowledge, and to be part of Down South Anomalies today.
Yeah.
Very welcome.
It's a pleasure.
All right. So, did you want to ask Sheryl anything about what's going on?
I think we should excuse us just briefly here, Baboula, but so much has been happening in the world of ufology on the public stage. Sheryl, I'm just wondering about, what's happening with David Grush. Ross Coulter there has copped it a little bit in terms of just verifying sources in terms of getting his stories wrong. This patch out of Area 51, there was supposedly crash retrievals. Now we believe that patch has been up on eBay. I think sometimes, Sheryl, when you fly too close to the sun, like Icarus, you get your wings burnt, and I believe that Ross's intentions are incredibly sincere. But I also think that you're going to end up in this media flurry where everyone is smearing disinformation. So do you just have an opinion of just where we sit at the moment? I believe there may be no more congressional hearings publicly. So it's an incredible point we've reached in ufology. I never believed on my lifetime we'd actually see this, but it's now looking really perplexing and confusing, a bit like Orwellian doublespeak.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it is a very confusing time. I think where we sit is at a standstill, really. I know that Representative Tim Burchett has sent a letter to the Inspector General of Intelligence Services asking for the information that David Grush has made known to them to make it public to Congress, and I doubt that's going to happen. It's a swirling mass of confusion and information and misinformation to redirect and control whatever's going on. And I was talking about this at our meeting on Saturday about, I think this is a very long narrative and a strategy that's actually been planned in one way to use people and information as a fulcrum to put pressure on for various people in Congress to get this information out. But at the same time, there's been a pushback by the Pentagon to stop the information about UFO crashes, retrieval of alien bodies, etc., to not go anywhere with that. And I think if you look back at our history, that's actually the result of any past congressional hearings, if you want to call them, symposiums. There's been a few of those. And you sort of get your hopes up, but nothing actually happens. So I don't know what's going to happen next.
But I feel at the moment like we're kind of being left up in the air with this. Do you know what I mean? It all sort of like there was this flurry of all this information coming out, and now it's just sort of like stopped.
Yeah.
And also feel historically it's not dissimilar to what we've experienced before. Not to this major extent, but we seem to take 2 steps forward and 3 backwards. And I can't help but think, in my neurological lack of neuroplasticity as I age, that maybe we're just seeing them trying to perception manage the population. I mean, with the ubiquitous nature of the mobile phone and what has ended up in the public domain through things like the Black Vault, I mean, there's more than enough information in the public domain now that if you seriously go out there and navigate it for what could be just a day, you will realize that disclosure's already occurred. It's occurred through eyewitnesses.
It occurs in small increments all the time that you don't really notice. But as a whole, if you sit back and look at the information that's come out over the last 30 or 40 years, it's like overwhelming.
And I also think I get this feeling in my dark recesses of paranoia, Sheryl, that there's about 10,000 young teenagers sitting in MIT or the Rand Corporation going, oh, it's all right. They just see it like the Truman Show. Let's not worry. They might be filming this stuff, but they can't really believe it. So I don't know. But I'm really, really grateful for you to just add comment to that. And I think there was a powerful statement you said about the fulcrum coming to this point. One last question, and please excuse us, Baboula, then we will get to you. You're our expert on what is written in the stars. What do you think's happening in Peru? Have you been following that?
Oh, yes. For those people who aren't aware, there's been reports of these 9-foot-tall alien beings or entities, whatever the people are calling them, floating in the air and shooting down at the population. And I don't know. Jamie. It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. It's hard to believe. I mean, there was some description, some suggestion that they were miners wearing jetpacks and flying over the population and doing this sort of stuff. I don't know. Your guess is probably as good as mine.
You know what I'd love to do? I'd love to actually do a documentary on just the notion of debunking these moments, because that is one of the most absurd official debunking statements I've ever heard. I mean, jetpacks, you're lucky these days with the most advanced jetpack to get at least 2 minutes in the air. Now, you're flying into one of the most extreme canopies in the world, the Amazon. You're going to have night vision goggles that are worth millions of dollars, and you'll probably end up crashing to the ground before you are able to scare these locals. And also, you are aware of just the history there in Brazil and that area of Peru where this has been going on in the 70s with
decades.
Polaris
Yeah.
and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that was pretty shocking actually, because in 2006 we had the late U.F.O researcher Anomalies came to Brisbane, and he spoke about it was actually probably the first time we'd heard about Colares here in this area, and what was going on, which was that these cylindrical shaped UFOs were actually firing down like beams of energy onto people and hurting them severely. And, AJ showed us photos of the wounds that people had, and how there was necrotic tissue there that was came on very quickly, after the wound, which didn't sort of add up. And there were a few, questions about the whole thing. And I guess for me, a lot of people have asked over the years, are some UFOs and their occupants dangerous? And in that respect, I think that they were, because there were lots of reports. There were people who were injured, and AJ was in touch with the woman who was the doctor treating these injuries at the time, and people were just scared to go out of their homes. So but there is a history of that in that area. Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
I also wonder, it makes it makes you, want to go to the thought that maybe this phenomena exploits, and I know I've had cases here in remote Australia, but it exploits remoteness and seems to take advantage of those situations. And so, at this point, I can't believe it's claim jumping gold mining cartels with jetpacks. Yeah. I mean, that to me sounds like the default switch.
Oh, that's coming out of Astounding Stories, isn't it?
I would rather go to the shape-shifting green 9-foot luminescent folding beings. I think that makes more sense. Anyway, today...
I just wanted to say, with what's going on in the US with the congressional hearings about UFOs, the timing is interesting, which is going to lead into the astrology talk.
Here we go.
Because we're sort of moving into the age of Aquarius, and Aquarius governs. It's ruled by Uranus, which is the great awakener, the awakener of consciousness, to the cosmos. So it's no surprise to me that this is actually occurring right now, because this is astrological timing playing itself out, and a great example of it doing that.
So it is written in the stars.
And I thank you. That's a very professional segue then into our extraordinary guests we have with us that can tell us about, initially, Baboula, I'd like to ask you about how you got involved with astrology, and maybe just go over a little bit of a potted history of astrology. When I was discussing this podcast with fellow colleagues, there's a really polarized notion to astrology. People are either very curious or they're completely dogmatic. There's nothing to this. But how can there be nothing to something that dates back to the earliest recorded records of humanity, was seen as science from an academic perspective till around the 1700s, when the supposed Enlightenment, I question that word deeply for that time. And again, we've had a huge renaissance. And when you look at critical figures on the world stage, from politicians to scientists, and do a little bit of digging, you find in the background that a lot of their decisions were made from a horoscope or an astrological perspective. And the other thing is, in archaeology now, I think in the last at least a decade or so, that they're beginning to term a new phrase there, and it's astroarchaeology. They're beginning to realize that so many sacred sites are as below as above, and they're based on the alignment of celestial bodies. So thank you very much for coming on board. I believe that you're a very strong association there with Sheryl. And I think it's really important that people open their hearts and minds and look at this from, an open-hearted perspective. And I'm sorry I've doubled up in the words there, but it's great to have you with us, Baboula.
Thank you so much. It's It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And I was also impressed by Cheryl's magnificent segue into astrology. but you know, you're absolutely right. There's so much to say about that whole issue that, you know, you've just been speaking about, and the history of it and what happened. I mean, back centuries ago, doctors, part of their medical training, a significant part of their medical training was astrology. And, you know, there's a whole, some people might have heard of Culpeper, the great herbalist from centuries ago, and he wrote this huge book, and every herbal remedy and plant and so on has astrological associations, and doctors were astrologers.
Wow.
And, you know, kings all used astrologers to, you know, guide them in their decisions and judgments about, you know, ruling the kingdom and so on. And then there was a concerted effort, of course, to shut it down and ridicule it and poo-poo it and say it's not real, it's all mumbo-jumbo. And I have to say, so I've been doing this a long time, so I'm used to all these issues and questions that come up. In my experience, people who reject it out of hand actually know nothing about it.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It's an opinion based on, oh, it must be nonsense. How could that possibly even be true?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've taught astrology for years, and I see again and again, you know, when people start learning about it, it literally blows their minds. You know, they just go, oh, my God, you know, how did I not understand this before?
Yeah.
And, you know, having worked with so many people for so many years, I see how it works and how valuable it is. And amongst my astrological friends, we'll often say things like, how do people live their lives without astrology? Because it's such a helpful tool to help us not only navigate these very complex, challenging lifetimes, but also to make sense of it all. And I think that's one of the most valuable things that it offers. It just makes sense because, you know, life is pretty crazy, let's face it, especially these days. And you can see so clearly in the movement of planets how that's reflected in what's going on here in our own individual lives and also in the collective field. I mean, it's just right there. It's so clear. So it's been a great blessing to me, and I'm very grateful to have had astrology in my life. And I think it's, you know, as a child, you know, you asked me this, you know, how did it come into my life? As a child, I used to spend a lot of time on my back just gazing skywards in the day and the evening, you know, looking at stars, looking at the blue sky, going, what's out there? What's past that blue? You know, that was always this kind of wondering that was with me from a very young age. And even as a teenager, I was just very aware of even the people in my family, my parents, my siblings. I was aware of their sun sign. You know, one was a Taurus, one was this, and I just knew instinctively that that meant something. And I was curious from a young age.
I think all of us out there, whether we've been interested, dabbled in it, or are passionate about it, have had a moment where one of those even, you know, superficial astrological books, and we had a book in the family that we would go to. What was that book called?
You know, the one that you're on your birthday, like what day you're born.
Like a big whole page for each day?
Yes, that book.
That's
that book actually... Oh, that scared the hell out of us.
That guy is amazing.
So on the money.
It's like, and I'm thinking, like, there's 365 days, depending on the day that you're born. It's like, oh my God, it's like you read it for your day. Or I've read everybody's in my family, and I can't believe how accurate it is to describe that person. It's just like, what's going on here?
Science would say that is confirmation bias. But, you know, the mere fact that you pick this book up naively, you're not even involved or curious about the subject, and, you know, you go to your page, like most people will at some stage in their life in a newspaper, look at those superficial horoscopes there.
Well, we all know our star sign. All of us know our star sign.
Yeah, that's the point.
And, you know, when we were younger, because we're more open when we're younger, we read about ourselves. You know, you'd see, you know, all, because there's different, you know, so many. But you read, every time you looked at it, you would go and read yours and you'd go, hey, that's pretty. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's working for me.
Everyone really deep down wants to know more about themselves, wants to understand themselves. And even the most hardened cynic about astrology, you ask them, they'll know what sun sign they are. They'll know. They may not want to admit too much about what they know, but it's very strong in us. We want to understand ourselves, and astrology is an amazing tool for us to understand not only ourselves, but the people around us.
Yes.
Fantastic for parents. To give them so much insight and understanding about their children. It's incredible for that.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
When you start to look into what someone does, an astrologer does, I've never realized how complex it appears to be. It appears to be like you need to be a mathematics major to actually start getting the charts out. So maybe if you can debunk a few of those myths and explain to us as an astrologer what you actually do.
Great. That's great. Yes, people do think it's mathematically really complex. Now, on that, a couple of things. When I started to learn, and I taught myself decades ago, before we had computers did not exist. So it was calculations, but I taught myself with the help of some books and instructions. And once I got the knack of it, I could whip up a chart hand-drawn really quickly. It was just practice. And it's not that complicated. But then, of course, computers came in. Wow, we can generate a birth chart or a chart of any moment in the blink of an eye. You just enter the birth details, bam, and there's an instant chart. So the computer is now doing a lot of all of the calculation legwork. But of course, in the old days, you know, when I was younger, in the old days, but way, way back, of course, it was all done by hand.
Of course.
And it's not that complicated. So now computers are generating all the data for us really, really fast, leaving us free to get on with the work of, you know, interpretation and so on. So if somebody contacts me and wants a session, a reading, and it may be their first one, it may be their 20th session with an astrologer, with any astrologer. So they may be very new, they may be very familiar with it. I just get the birth data, put it into my astrology program, generate the chart in an instant, and then when they come, we sit down, and if it's their first time ever and they've never seen their birth chart before, then I'm just going through all the landscape, all the planets, what signs they're in, the relationship between the planets. So, for example, somebody's sun, they might be born when the sun was moving through Cancer, the sign of Cancer. So there's a lot to share with them about what that means in itself. But also when they were born, the sun might have been sitting right next to the planet Uranus in Cancer. And now you've got a whole other piece of information. And then, so you're bringing in all the different placements of planets in signs. So when people say, oh, I know 3 Cancerians and they're all different, so how could astrology be real? That's because everyone's birth chart is so unique.
Yeah, of course.
Because there's all these different planets, because the planets keep moving through the sky. And so everyone's chart is different. So I could meet someone who's born on the same date as me, but in a different year. So the sun might be in the same position, but all the other planets are going to be somewhere completely different. So it is complex, and there's layers of information. But it's like everything. It's like learning to paint. It takes time and practice, and you build up skills and experience. It comes with experience. Also, I have to say, intuition is a part of this as well. So there's technique and knowledge, but that's true with a lot of things, isn't it? And then there's also intuition, and that comes with experience and practice and fine-tuning your own sensitivities and so on.
Yeah.
And
Can I just address quickly before I forget? You know how you said you can, three Cancerians and they're all different. Can I just say that Jamie, who's my husband now, and my ex-husband are actually born on the same day, same month, same year. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. What are the odds?
Pretty high, pretty remote.
That I'm going to get that. And I just attribute that to I married, the right birthday, but the wrong man.
Right.
Time. Got the birthday right, but the wrong person. Yeah.
Now that brings up a really interesting couple of things. One is these two men would have been born at a different time of day and a different location.
Yes.
That's already giving you some variation. So that would change what we call the houses in the chart.
Yes, yeah.
And
because they're like, if you put them on a spectrum, one's at one end and the other one's at the other end.
So interesting.
Hence, that's why I left the first one.
Right. And then the other piece of this is that on a soul level, they are two different souls. And at a soul level, they will be, as you will know, at a very different state of evolution of consciousness.
Oh, yes.
Right?
One's Neanderthal and the other one's Homo sapiens.
Right.
I think what happened, the other thing, Baboula, is incredible. I was working as a diversional therapist in a nursing home group. They were a pretty frightening nursing home group in their level of care, and we were both passionately motivated, but we were both way too young to be the therapists that we were
at the time.
Most of the therapists in that game as diversional therapists were like 1 or 2 months away from getting a nursing home bed themselves. So for young people at our age to be in there was quite astounding.
It wasn't an accredited, profession at the time when we were doing it in the mid 80s. You know what I mean?
So, but the one thing about your intuition is, my wife actually came to the door. She hadn't met me. She hadn't seen me. She knew nothing about me. She'd come to assist me with just giving me the guidelines of this work in this separate nursing home. But you had a moment outside that door.
Oh, no, I knew as soon as the matron had told me that I had to go to this nursing home and meet up with this new diversional therapist. I knew that my life was going to change even before I got there.
Yeah.
As soon as she said it to me, I was like, oh, my God. And then as soon as when I got there and I saw him, I said, oh, my God, because I was married with a child then. I was like, that's who I'm supposed to be with. That's who I was supposed to be with. Wow. And I thought, how is this going to happen? And it happened.
So
I willed it. I willed it.
And also, you see, as an astrologer, if I were to look at your chart and go back to that time, I'd see it as clear as could be.
Right.
Really?
Right.
I would see it. I would see, because you see the planets keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
So an astrologer is looking at the birth chart, which is giving all the information about this soul's incarnation in this lifetime. But we're also looking at where are the planets now and how are they triggering or activating the different things in the chart. And it helps people so much when very often we get calls from people going through a crisis, a challenge, a crossroads, a difficult choice. Just a question about, I'm feeling really lost and confused. And as an astrologer can really help them. So I just see it all the time. So much to make sense of it and help them. Do you know, the comment I get so often is, thank you so much. You've confirmed what somehow inside myself I knew, but I wasn't trusting what I really knew, and you've absolutely nailed it and confirmed it for me. And now I know exactly where I need to go.
Right.
That's a very common response.
And that's a really powerful...
Hang on, Cheryl wants to say something.
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to add that if you use the analogy that, and which it is, that the Greeks named the planets in later years. So, you've got Venus and you've got Jupiter and you've got all the other, Mercury, the messenger and all this. And when two people like yourselves come together, some of those planets are communing with each other. They're coming together, and some aren't. Some don't want to talk to each other, so that they're at odds with each other. So,
right.
And I see that as how you can see things in relationships that are where they're going to work and when you're going to butt heads.
Right.
The other thing that really touched me then was when you were talking about utilizing your intuition. And, no matter how people approach this subject, and there's going to be a lot of people that have major problems with it or have always had problems with it.
That's okay.
It's really important that in the midst of crisis, that people have a moment to go towards someone that is passionately, intuitively, giving them a sense of catharsis and connection. And even if people want to see this from a placebo level, and modern medicine has to acknowledge that the placebo is just as powerful as the whole pharmaceutical industry, if even not more.
Let's do research without the placebo and see how far we get.
Yeah. So I think that, you've got to open your heart and your mind to this and realize that there is this ancient history to this, but at the same time, astrology is only as good as the astrologer. And it sounds like you've got that ability to tune into people's intuition and give them that recognition they need that will then give them the strength to go forward.
So, Baboula, how would you use, you say you can use it in everyday life. And so can you give us an example of how you could use astrology in everyday, or how people do use it in everyday life?
Well, there are many branches of astrology and many different uses for it, many. I'm very interested in medical astrology, for example, but there's a thing called electional astrology where you can use it to pinpoint the most beneficial time or date to launch a book, to set a date for a wedding, to take an important journey somewhere, to start a business. And you're looking at, so for example, a client of mine who I've been working with for many years, she's recently put out another book and wanted to look at within this time frame. So she had a period of a couple of months. I want to launch the book, to publish the book within this time frame. Help me to find the most opportune window or windows, to set a date for this to happen. And so I'm going through that time frame and I'm eliminating the times and going, oh no, you don't want to do it then, you don't want to do it then. And so I'm looking at the areas that look more beneficial. You'll never get a perfect time. You're looking for the most appropriate time or period that suits that particular event. So is it the launch of a book? Is it a wedding? Is it a journey? Is it, what is it? The start of a business, for example. And even down to, and believe me, the field of medical astrology is pretty remarkable. And even though I have an interest, look at that. I'm not, she just happened to have it there with her.
All right.
I knew we'd talk about this.
That's medical astrology.
You are brilliant with segues and book promotions.
Oh, she's excellent.
Who is the author of that book, Sheryl? Who is the author of that book?
Jane Ritter Patrick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Brilliant.
Now I leave that specific field mainly to the experts who are also trained. They are astrologers, but they're also trained medically in some field of medicine.
Okay.
Wow.
And I just have a natural interest because I've always been interested in health and so on. So you can use it to, like, if you have to have surgery, for example, and you have some choice in when it's going to happen. Obviously, if there's an emergency, you just do what you have to do. Yeah. But if there's some choice, there's certain times and dates. Yeah, that's not the best. I'd wait for a couple of days and do it then. Right?
So what would be, so if you looked at a date and you said, well, this is not a good date, what would be, what would you see there that would say to you that is not a good time to do it then?
For example, can, depending on what the issue is, what is the organ, what is the part of the body, different parts of the body and organs are ruled by different signs and planets, right? So you would prefer not to have an operation on a particular organ when the moon's in the sign that rules or governs that particular organ, or when Mercury's retrograde. If that can be avoided, that's helpful.
Right.
So there are, it's quite complex.
Yeah.
And as I said, I tend to leave that to the experts because I don't want to misdiagnose or, you know, send someone off in the wrong direction. But in very general terms, I'll bring it in. If someone's coming to me for a session and they're having some health issues, I can certainly include general observations about that astrologically and help with the timing a little bit, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got to be quite knowledgeable. I mean, yeah.
I mean, people who have quite a lot of Gemini energy in their birth chart, they often have a vulnerability around their lungs, you know, and tend to be prone to getting lung infections and, you know, things around that. There's a bit of a vulnerability there.
Okay.
Right? And people with maybe strong Aries energy, their sun or moon or rising sun, the head is Aries, and they might, you know, like children with Aries rising or Aries sun, they often have, you know, bumps and scars on their head because they're rushing headlong into life, or they're falling over and cutting themselves and having accidents and injuries.
Right.
You know, and infections and things that end in itis often are to do with Mars Aries heat and inflammation. Right. So they're just some basic things. And that knowledge goes back hundreds, thousands of years actually about medical astrology, from India, from ancient Greece, from Persia. It's in all those ancient texts.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And do you think this is allegorous in a way to like sort of shamanic knowledge? You know, I always debate that point with pharmacists about how in the hell did native people in the Amazon reach and find things like ayahuasca and other plants that would be dangerous but used together, that enzyme protects them. So it mustn't have been a matter of
trial and error.
Otherwise they would be dead by now, the entire community. But they did fall back on their intuition. Do you think it's allegorous to that? It feels like there's a shamanic aspect to astrology to me.
I agree with you. I think there is a shamanic aspect to it, and again, that depends a lot on the astrologer to what degree that is there. But I do agree with that. I'm someone who takes a certain point of view that the bottom line with everything is that we're also operating within the realm of mystery. We don't necessarily fully understand
of course
how and why everything works.
Yeah.
You know, and that can sound to some people like a cop-out who only want scientific evidence and proof. But I'm completely fine with, you know, really understanding that there's a certain element of mystery, and that's where intuition comes in. Again, I feel that when any of us who work with people closely, as does Sheryl and myself, there's also other dimensions at play here. There's other beings that come in and are part of the process, which again, some would reject that idea. I just know that is so. You know, there's all sorts of things going on in that space, you know. And I always feel like when I start reading a chart for somebody, whether it's their first or 10th time, I just begin and the chart literally starts talking to us, you know, as we get into it. And I'll just start with the simple and the basics, and that leads to something. And suddenly things just start to open up, and I find myself speaking just intuitively. There's a flow. You know, it's like the chart is literally speaking to us, which again, some people are going to go, that's just really weird and woo-woo. And that's fine. That's fine if people feel like that. You know,
Yeah, that's extremely a naive statement on their behalf as well. And I mean, I'm interested to just ask you, Sheryl, were you drawn to this subject matter prior to doing this extensive research that you'd done for many years up there in Queensland with your beautiful late husband, or was it something that this research led you to?
For me, I've got an interest in everything. So I was one of those people in my teens who'd read the horoscope in the newspaper, and I go, "Oh yeah, that's rubbish," or "That's interesting," or whatever. But I think for me, I'm going to give you an astrological answer, is that I have Aquarius rising in my chart, and Aquarius rules astrology. So somewhere in my life, astrology was always on the cards for me to actually have a connection to it, to look into it. May not be an astrologer, which I'm not. I'm an astrology student of Baboula's actually, but it's all linked to the stars, you know. So UFO research, extraterrestrial life, and astrology, they're all linked because they're ruled by that Aquarian energy. And also it connects to your comment about shamanism too, Jamie, because, you know, most people see their life experiences from a random and disconnected viewpoint. And this creates a worldview where synchronistic events have no meaning or significance. But from the shamanic perspective, everything is connected. Everything has meaning and significance. And even the famous psychologist Carl Jung, you know, he thought it possible to uncover a greater meaning to seemingly random events. And he suggested that they're more than mere coincidences, but instead messages from the unconscious. Now, he said that synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. From the astrological perspective, it agrees with that idea that synchronistic events have deeper meaning and connection, but it takes that step further, and that's where it goes on to suggest that it's the planetary influences that create the guideposts for those synchronistic experiences. So for me, you know, it was always planned in my chart that I was going to have that astrological connection, and it wasn't just going to happen randomly.
And, you know, I can't believe we actually put barriers and borders up to our consciousness. You know, I mean, if you're open to the supposed ufological equation, then, you know, your mind should remain open. But all of us seem to have this thing where we're worried about our credibility, especially in Western culture. And I mean, you know, only in Western culture, because every other culture still has that template of astrology there. And whether it's predominant or not,
or they're open to mystery.
Traditions.
They're open to mysteries. They're open to things that they don't understand, and they don't need to be able to scientifically explain and give an answer to everything. That's our problem. Our problem in the West is that science will give us an answer to everything, and if science can't give us an answer, it doesn't exist. It's not real, whatever it is.
But science is a fairly new subject,
and
it's still evolving.
Of course,
and
it
it's
is.
still in its infancy.
Well,
and it can't be seen as the bottom line.
Well, no, infancy means it's you know, it hasn't grown up. Things change all the time, and the more, you know, as time goes by, we find out more things, and so we have to incorporate those new things into what we already knew. But some people are just like they reach something like they stop there. It's like, I've learned all this, I believe this, but any more information now I'm not taking on board, and so hence that doesn't exist, and that's where they become stuck there, and they're not willing to be open to more information as it comes through.
And I think that's why we keep bringing up this short article, which was written in 40 Times only a short while ago, called The Boggle Factor.
Oh, yeah.
And that is, you know, and you'd be very aware of this, both of you, but especially Sheryl, in terms of like ufological narratives. and you can accept the craft landing, maybe the being coming out, but the moment it puts on a kilt and starts doing a Highland fling, you stand back from it.
No, that I'm not going to accept.
But
it's like,
but that these stories get even crazier than that, and they're led by sincere, credible witnesses. So we should actually dismiss the boggle factor and keep that mind as open as we can. And I think in many ways it's very allegorous to the history of astrology,
history of everything.
and why wouldn't we be affected by the cosmos and the celestial spheres? We are all subatomic particles that can be not changed and altered, not taken away and given back. At some point out there, we could have been part of Mars, our subatomic structure, and we've reformed here into this temporary state as this animated flesh and bone entity for a short while.
Well, I think too is like, if you work in a hospital, or you work in a nursing home, or you work in some sort of facility where you're looking after people that are in some sort of distress, when the moon is full, it's cray-cray time. The other day, I was out doing something for quite a while out there, and I came across 3 people that were having mental health issues in the moment, and I thought to myself, must be a full moon. And by the time I got home, it was night, and I looked up and there it was.
Yep.
Fully formed, and I went, yep, there you go. And I knew just from what was going on around me that it was a full moon. It was going to be a full moon where I hadn't looked at it for ages. You know what I mean?
And yet I train as a nurse.
Well, yeah.
And they will dispel that myth medically instantly.
Yeah.
But every time we're on the wards doing a late night shift and a full moon, things were markedly different.
You knew it was a full moon.
Exactly. And many emergency services actually put on extra staff around full moon times, and nature is just fully alive. Fishermen go out to fish at full moon because the fish are running and the sap is rising in the plants. We are very, very connected to everything that's moving in the universe. And as Sheryl said, and for me, astrology, she was talking about Carl Jung, who, by the way, was also an astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
Astrology has absolutely confirmed for me what all the mystics tell us, that everything is connected. Everything, absolutely everything. And so when planets are moving, we're experiencing different things. And like a little example that I recall some years ago, I was in my office and I was working and I was powering through a lot of work, and the moon was in Aries. Now the moon changes sign every 2.5 days. And all of a sudden I just went, oh God, that's enough. I have to stop. I've got to get outside in the garden. And I went outside in the garden. When I came back in, I glanced up at my astrology program, and that moment when I suddenly just went, I have to go outside. I've got to stop working. It's enough. The moon had literally moved into Taurus. And Taurus is an earth sign. It's to do with, the ground and earth and nature. And I didn't know in that moment that was the moment that the moon was changing sign. It was right on the moment, but my whole body and energy just went, enough.
Shifted. Yep.
I'm going to go outside.
Right.
Wow. And get on the ground, and get out into the garden. Yeah. And that kind of stuff happens all the time, but we're not necessarily paying attention and noticing, that we're responding to the movement of the planets, and for example, when a planet's at the very, very end of a sign, and they're all moving at different speeds, so the sun is in a sign for a month, for example, Jupiter's in a sign for 12 years, and so on. When it's at the last degree, things can get really quite intense, and I've observed this more and more lately. There's an intensity that happens right at the end of a sign. And it's really palpable and really felt. And the more I've noticed that, I just keep seeing it all the time, so it's very real in my experience. And I'm now so, like, it's just how it is for me, that if someone says astrology is a load of rubbish, I just go,
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
I've had those experiences.
Yeah.
I've had those experiences too, because as you know, Baboula, I'm not necessarily in my chart. I don't necessarily focus a lot on details. I'm the big picture person. So, but when Virgo is playing itself out, which is all about details, you know, I can become a bit anal retentive, you know, and OCD, because it's all about the little tiny details that are going on, you know, around in my life. And then when Mercury retrogrades or something's, you know, affecting my moon in Gemini, which I have, which is all about communication. It's about the media. It's about writing, all that sorts of. Suddenly I'm swamped with email messages, phone calls. And I can have 5-6 phone calls in one day about something, which when I haven't had any phone calls for a week, you know. So all and opportunities to come in for me to can you please, you know, go on this podcast, or can, you know, all these invitations to speak to people. So it's all about communication too. So it does affect our lives in those ways, and I'm always amazed how it does. It's remarkable, really.
Actually, that amazement is a good thing. Like, after all these years, I can still end up with my jaw on the floor going, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's never boring to me. It's always quite stunning, actually. It's quite stunning how things that may be happening are reflected in the movement of the planets, you know, in ways that can still not take me by surprise, but just go, wow. You know, after all these years, yeah.
And I just wanted to say, as a good example for Jamie and Aspa, is that if you could talk about what's happening in the United States at the moment with the Pluto return, because for me, I'm also being the big picture person, I'm very interested in what's happening on the world stage and how the astrological influences affecting that. So is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So countries have birth charts. So you know, the United States has a birth chart, the 4th of July, of course, and the birth chart of Australia has a birth chart as well. The birth chart of the United States has Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn. Now, Pluto is a very slow-moving outer planet. In 2005, he was demoted by the astronomers, which just made all the astrologers laugh. And that's another story. Anyway, Pluto represents a very, very, very powerful energy of deep transformation and death and rebirth. In mythology, Pluto is also Hades, the lord of the underworld, a very powerful energy. And it's at 27 degrees of Capricorn in the chart of the United States. And last year, Pluto for the last few years, since 2008, has come back into Capricorn. And that's a whole other topic that we go into another time if you ever wanted to, or we could just talk about that. That's a huge deal, that Pluto has been in the sign of Capricorn since 2008. And by the end of 2024, will have finally moved out and moved into Aquarius. Now, what it means for the United States is that America is having its Pluto return. So Pluto takes 246 years to complete an orbit around the sun. In other words, to go through all the signs and return back to where it was when we were born. Now, we will never live that long, but countries do, right?
Yeah.
So the United States is having its Pluto return. And that country is being brought to its knees, and in so many ways. And astrologers have been watching this coming, and it's been, you know, on all astrologers' radar for years. And we've been seeing this building up and building up. And I read an article, I think last year or the year before, by someone who's not an astrologer, who said empires historically tend to exist for about 250 years, which is a Pluto cycle,
Right.
And so America is going through this very intense time of calamity. It's about the breaking down and the dismantling of all its structures and systems to prepare the ground for some totally new form of functioning that will begin to emerge in the coming years. Now, whether that goes down a very dark path or whether it's a transformation that will be very enlightening and illuminating for the people in the nation remains to be seen.
Right.
But it's really,
let's hope it's the latter.
Any other country, but, you know, the States is really, really going through it.
They've been, I've heard that in not even to do with this astrology, but just you know, the way it's just, you know, it's I don't know, its influence has changed in the world, and
you know, and you know, there's a branch of astrology that's called mundane astrology, which studies the charts of nations and countries and leaders and world events, and that's another area of interest as well, because it's absolutely fascinating to watch, you know, the movement of planets through the charts of countries and nations, and you'll see the kind of the general personality and style of a nation and its people reflected in the birth chart.
Right.
Where could people go to look at charts like that? What's a good source to recommend for them if they're starting out to have a look at this?
There's a few big websites. One is just called www.astro.com, and that's a great, huge program, a chart in the public domain where people can create their own birth chart. Even better if they know their time of birth, but even without a time, just with a date and a year, you'll still get a basic chart. You just get all the information if there's also a time. And there's a lot of great information on that particular website. There are a few others, but that's a kind of a go-to that I will send people to if they're wanting to generate a chart of anything. And you can also, you know, what I do, if someone shows up in public life, I go, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what his chart or her chart looks like. I'll just get their name and I'll write their name in the search box and horoscope after it, so that it's going to specifically take me to an astrology site that might actually have their birth chart. Right. I can't do that. I'll just look for their date of birth, which is usually pretty available. This, you know, for someone in public life. So, you know, I do like to keep track of these kind of things and watch all these events unfold, because I know where the planets are. You know, that's part of my job. I know where the planets are and how they're moving. Very, very, very interesting.
Sorry.
No, go on, please, Sheryl, please.
Just quickly, I was just going to say the other thing that I find interesting is, you know, it's like you said earlier, Jamie, you know, there's astrology and then there's astrologers. So it depends on the abilities of the astrologer to be able to interpret things. And they can't, even the best astrologers can't always know or even guess what something means. And I know that when Baboula and I started our astrology podcast in 2020, she was telling me then that astrologers knew something really big was going to happen in 2020, had to do with Pluto, but weren't actually sure how it was going to play out. But it was really, really big, which it turned out to be a pandemic, you know, supposedly. Yeah.
And I don't think historically we've had an incident, especially in our lifetimes, on that scale. I mean, you know, our families have all lived through World War, but here was something that brought the entire world to its knees.
Yeah, at the same time.
And it made people think about their mortality. Please how can people find the podcast
Your
that both of you do?
Yeah.
If they go to YouTube and put in Body Light Center channel, it'll be on there.
Brilliant.
Okay.
And is this something you do regularly, the both of you?
Yeah, every new and full moon, so it's every 2 weeks.
Wow.
We look at the new moon, the full moon, and the current energies. And just, this is so interesting. I've known Sheryl for years, not like super well, but just known Sheryl for years. And she contacted me one day, Gemini moon, Aquarius rising, and this is her, and she asked me if I'd like to do like an interview on the current astrological energies, because a lot was going on in 2020. And I said, yeah, happy to. So we did this chat, this interview. I forget whether it was a new moon or a full moon at the time. And we just enjoyed ourselves so much. We just kept going and we haven't stopped. So every 2 weeks, we just do these podcasts together.
Yeah.
And of course, we've become even closer friends through all of that as well. And people find it really helpful. It's helping them to sort of track and follow the movements and what's going on now, what's coming up, and so on. And we get lots of comments that people find it really helpful to explain, understand, and navigate what we're all going through. These are huge epic times we're living in.
And it helps people understand too that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to something.
Wow. I mean, that can only be from a therapeutic perspective of great assistance to others. And I think one of the things I'm taking from this, from my naive knowledge of it, is that, again, it's getting into this Taoist notion of you need to be aware of your life. You need to pay attention to the moment. You need to pay attention to your moods. And sometimes, depending on where those stars and planets are aligning, that maybe you need to reset your mood like you did going outside, coming back in. That can only really assist us in getting much more value out of our life and not taking it for granted and getting caught up in the chaos of reality. And I mean, it's so odd, if I can digress here, back to the notion of Jung's book that you brought up, Sheryl, on synchronicity, because we realized at one point, we've got so much literature in this house, we can't breathe. We think the foundations will collapse through the amount of hard media books we've got. But we realized we had a research deficit when I found that Jung had written an entire book on synchronicity. And I can remember speaking to my wife about, good heavens, have you come across this book? Have you ever read it? Anyway, that day, my wife is an avid recycler. She's put our grandchildren through dance classes through 10 cents at a time with bottles out of bins. She used to work for Reverse Garbage, which was a pioneer of diverting stuff from landfill and getting it out to the right places in Sydney.
Reuse, recycle.
Yeah, you were a designer for them. Yeah. That afternoon, tell them.
I went out and I was doing my bottling up in an area that I go to because people collect their bottles for me and keep them. And I opened one of those recycling bins and there was a bunch of books and there was Jung's synchronicity book sitting right on the top.
She walked back in the door and I thought, we've got to keep...
I said, guess what I found today?
Yeah.
What?
And this leads me to my next question, Baboula. I think that a lot of people naively come to astrology thinking, is this fortune telling? Can I actually place bets on here? And, very similar, Sheryl, to the noise attached to ufology in an allegorous way, that there's a lot of exploitation around these narratives and this signal. So how do people out there navigate through that world of like the 2-bit horoscope in a newspaper to find the right astrologer for them?
Ooh, okay.
Well, no, I wasn't sure who you were asking, but actually, the way this works for me is that in my own experience and perception of life, the right person just shows up. And I'll say to people, if you're ready to find a healer or astrologer or someone, just that being ready and perhaps even speaking that, like, I really need to find an astrologer. This is part of the synchronistic magic of life. Lo and behold, what usually happens is that someone will just turn up, or a friend will say, oh, you've got to go and see this person. Or you'll see something, a flyer or something, you go, oh, follow the thread, follow the the message, and that can be a starting point. That might not be the astrology you end up staying with, or it might be. It might lead you down a trail. It might take you through a few different, because astrologers all work differently. They're different people, and so on. I think these things have a natural, organic way of happening. When that old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That's how things work so often.
Wow.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, that's always been like that in our life.
So again, it's that thing of heightening your intuition and having faith in that intuition to take you to the right place. Now, let me tell you a little side story here about my late grandmother, Virginia, who lived next door. I had that thing where my mother's parents were next door, so I had two sets of parents. I had to rebel double the time when I became a teenager. But she was a lovely, slightly eccentric lady, but she was part of the Christian Science movement. And they were like definitely no horoscopes, nothing to do with the paranormal. But there was a lounge room, which was your classic Federation-style 30s lounge room. So it had the beautiful LED light doors, and those doors to the half of the other lounge room were perpetually locked. We could not get in there. And as curious children, we were so fascinated what was in there. So after she passed away, we opened those doors with my mother, who was just as curious. And in there were horoscopes piled to the ceiling. She had been doing everything that Christian Science said not to do, but she'd been doing it in this locked half of the lounge room. And in a sense, it sort of made sense to me because she was a very intuitive person.
What a great story.
Yeah.
So that was her secret.
That was her secret.
Yeah.
And like Baboula, sorry, go on, finish.
No, go on, please, Sheryl.
No, I was just going to say, like Baboula said before, in regard to a medical astrology, I was told some years ago by someone who knew this person that one of the head of one of the Brisbane hospitals was an under-the-table astrologer. So, I'm not surprised by this. And there's a lot of people who keep that interest, tucked away for this, like your grandmother.
I think it's a bit of a shame, in a sense, that they have to hide that. And we know in ufology there's a lot like that as well, because of the ridicule attached to it. And that's enough to bring people to a halt. But intuitively, if they're passionate, they're not going to stop.
No.
They might be silenced in the public arena. They're not going to stop. Which brings me to the fact, Baboula, that intelligence services have used astrology. I mean, MI5, there's incredible documentation. And there are, presidents, prime ministers.
Absolutely.
Nancy Reagan didn't make a move, never made a move. And, clearly she was running the country there for a while, not Ronald, but without her astrologer, it was like huge,
Yeah.
That's right. And there has been a dramatic change. As I said, I've been doing this for a long time. And when I was starting out, I was always a little bit wary about who I mentioned astrology to.
Sure.
And there weren't many teachers and books around and so on. But now, there's been such an explosion and a renaissance as we move into the Aquarian age of interest in astrology. It's all over the internet. It's everywhere. There's so many books. There's so many great astrologers and teachers. It's wonderful. And that's going to keep happening to the point where it will just become normal. Although it is ruled by the planet Uranus, so it may not ever become entirely normal and mainstream, but so much more acceptable.
So can I just ask you, because that 60s song, The Dawning of the Age of Aquarius, when does that start? Are we still in the dawning, or have we gone into it, or when's the cutoff, the date where we start? Because it's been since the 60s and I'm still waiting for it to happen.
I know. Look, this is something I kind of run workshops on this sometimes. It's a big subject, and I'll try and just give a simple sort of a look at that. It's a really big subject.
Is it like perimenopause? Like you're not in menopause, but you're leading up to it? Is it like that? Is it like a transition thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're in peri-Aquarius.
I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that analogy. Perfect.
I'm going to use it in our next podcast.
Go for it.
But there is this thing called the Great Year, which lasts for 2,600 years.
Wow, that's a long year.
Yes, and it's a huge cycle,
right?
For our Earth on a tilt. Very simply, the North Pole and the pole star shifts, and slowly over 26,000 odd years, it moves through all the 12 signs of the zodiac, and we are now we're at that cusp of the old age of Pisces. So each of these sub-ages of all the 12 signs lasts for just over 2,000 years, 2,160, I think it is.
Wow.
We are now at the end of the age of Pisces, but we're also at the end of this huge 26,000-year cycle. In India, they call it the Kali Yuga. And always
we've got a double whammy here. We've got a double whammy.
Yes.
Right.
The Mayan calendar, all these old traditions speak of these huge cycles of time, and that we are now, humanity and the Earth are now collectively in this time of huge shift and transition, and the astrology speaks to that as well. And so it is a process, absolutely. There's not like a date, although some astrologers might say there's a date, but I don't believe that. I think the first glimpses of the Aquarian age actually started to come in 1781 when the planet Uranus was discovered. Uranus is the planet that rules astrology and Aquarius.
Right.
And so something went, and before that, for thousands of years, they only knew about the planets up to Saturn because you couldn't see beyond those planets without strong telescopes. So we can see the planets up to Saturn with the naked eye. Suddenly they had a telescope strong enough, and a German astrologer called Herschel discovered this planet Uranus. The world hasn't been the same since. Everything changed from that. There were revolutions all over the planet, in America, in France, everywhere. Science, the scientific revolution, the industrial age, everything rapidly changed dramatically in that period. And I even read recently abolition of slavery. It was in that decade that laws were passed in Britain that women could no longer be burnt at the stake as punishment. Up until then they could be. So there were lots of things, and this new concept of the common man, human rights, people have rights, was a new concept that started to come in at that time. And so slowly, each step of the way, there's been this movement, this transition, which takes a few hundred years into a new age, because these ages last for just over 2,000 years. So yes, it is a transition, but it's now accelerating big time because, as Sheryl mentioned before, with Pluto in Capricorn since 2008 and coming to the end, by the end of 2024, Pluto will have left Capricorn, the sign that represents systems, structures, organizations, governments, top-down control. Pluto's job is to bring out the shadow and the corruption, right, of all of that. And it's going to fully move into Aquarius, and that's going to be a massive acceleration and push into the Aquarian. But the Aquarian age, we could also argue that it's already here in many ways, but the old age hasn't completely died or been dismantled.
It's hanging on by its nails.
In desperation, trying to maintain its control and its grip, right? Yeah. But people are waking up, because Aquarius is about awakening. It's about the mass awakening of humanity and a higher level of consciousness, which includes our galactic brothers and sisters, right?
Right.
All of it. It's a massive thing that we're going through. It's on such a big level. You know, it's why all this drama's going on the planet. It's intense. It's challenging. It's huge. But it's about awakening. It's actually about awakening, which is thrilling and exciting.
And I think if
you know, sorry, Cheryl.
If I think if UFO disclosure is going to happen, this is the time. It's like putting fertilizer in the garden, making sure that what you've planted gets enough water, and everything comes together at the right time in the right place. And this is what the planetary energies are doing for the birth of this disclosure to come about.
Hopefully some fruit will bear.
Well, let me just ask you, Sheryl, I mean, like myself, did you ever think we'd reach this time, you know, on the world stage, especially in America?
Sheryl probably would have, because she's been looking at this stuff and she knows.
Well, will you just not interject there at the moment? But did you ever think we'd reach this time where someone like Grush would come forward and we'd have public congressional hearings and there would be Arrow and NASA coming onto the world stage and saying, hey, these things happen every day. We don't know what they are. I never thought that would occur in my lifetime.
Yeah, in one word answer, no. I'm as shocked as everybody else, actually. Okay. And I didn't, you know, because over time we've seen things where we've gotten close to things, and, you know, we had the 2001 Disclosure Project. We had all those people with good qualifications come forward, talk about what they knew about UFOs, what happened, you know, not a lot. And, you know, and you sort of develop this cynicism over time. You think no matter what happens, it's just not going to go forward. So born from disappointment, of course. And, you know, and I guess I'm still not convinced at the moment that this is going to bring about disclosure, but I do think that this genie's not going to go back into the bottle either.
No.
So now what that means, I don't know. Let's just wait and see.
Well, it's just out there now, and so when things like that are out there, then more people will come forward, hopefully, and say, look, yeah, it's...
And I am having a few people, and I've had a mixed career. I was out there in therapy, but I've been an experimental performer, so my credibility has always been highly questionable. But I've had people coming up to me going, hey, looks like that research of yours is paying off. You know, and people I never expected would say that.
Yeah.
So I'm quite astounded, and I think in a sense what you told us about, Baboula, there with this age of Aquarius, you know, it's all the puzzle pieces are coming together, and from an astrological perspective, there is great insight into that. Now, if I can just ask you, in terms of like the discovery of Uranus, is anything happening in terms of the Hubble and the James Webb telescope that are opening our eyes to a greater, deeper cosmos out there and stars appearing? Does that mean horoscopes are going to become incredibly more complex in terms of the stars they're dealing with?
Is it just what affects us? Is it just what's in our galaxy, our solar system, or do you things from outside can affect us as well? Do you know that?
Yeah, look, that's a really, really great question. Since around 2005, there have been, I mean, just to backtrack a moment, so Uranus was discovered in 1781, and then Neptune was discovered in 1946. And things were happening then that were very Neptunian. You know, people getting into mysticism and, you know, all sorts of anesthetics were discovered and all sorts of things that are very Neptunian, and photography. 1930, Pluto was discovered, the lord of the underworld, and what happened? Out of that emerged Hitler and World War II.
Nazi.
Depression.
Depression.
Huge. Now, since around 2005, there have been these other outer bodies in an area that's called the Kuiper Belt, which is part of our solar system, but it's also sort of connected to further out. There are these bodies that have been discovered since then, and they're still discovering more. And this is where it gets very interesting. the astronomer or the person who discovers or finds something, traditionally, and I believe this is still the case, is given the honour of naming it, and they tend to follow the tradition of naming a body after a figure in mythology.
Right.
Interesting. And so when astrologers receive the information from the astronomers about where this is, what its movement is, and what it's called, they can start working with it.
Right.
And so more astrologers are starting to look more fully into these bodies out in the Kuiper belt, and they've been given names often that come from different cultures beyond the Greek Roman cultures.
Mm.
And from Hawaii and India and different places like that, and they're very interesting, and they seem to represent new energies that are coming in for Earth and humanity as we go through this incredible time of transition, which are connecting us more and more to the outer galaxy. I personally feel that, we are part of the entire universe and all the squillions of galaxies, and of course it all is one, but it's enough for us to work with what's going on in our own solar system.
Sure.
It's plenty, because that's what I think has more of a direct impact and influence on our experience here on Earth. It's even enough just to work with the planets up to Pluto. That's a ton of information. Then there's the asteroid belt, of thousands of named asteroids. Yeah. They're fun to play with.
That's right. Yeah.
But you wouldn't want to put them all in the chart. You'd end up with a migraine.
Yeah. Is Nibiru, does Nibiru play any, that, the planet X, does that?
The 12th planet.
The 12th planet, does that ever?
Do you know, in all honesty, I haven't really looked into that very much.
Okay.
I'm aware of it, but I haven't really worked with it or looked into it particularly. So I can't really give you a reason.
Because it's supposedly on an elliptical.
Well, some of these outer planets are, even Pluto, it doesn't have a beautiful, neat circle.
No, so it's an elliptical thing, and it comes around every 3,600 years, hence the 360-degree.
Yes.
So I don't know.
So these outer bodies have very long, slow orbits. Like Eris, for example, has been in Aries and still is all of last century and still now, because they're so far away. It takes them a long time to make it around the whole zodiac.
Yeah. Okay.
What I think is interesting, the story that you told me, Baboula, about the role of the asteroid Corona when we had the coronavirus coming to our attention. So there's all those connections as well, which are quite mysterious. And it's a huge subject.
Yeah, very synchronistic. It's fascinating. When we were having, I'm digressing a little bit, but it's just how all this stuff works, and you get to a point where you're not surprised anymore. When we were having those awful floods, in February, what was it, 2022, I think, last year, northern rivers and so on. Something in me went, just check the asteroids. And there were these asteroids to do with water. There's literally an asteroid called Flood, which I forget now. I haven't looked at the chart for ages, but it was spot on at the time of the floods. It was right on another planet right at that time. And there was a couple of others associated, like Storm and Flood, asteroids with those kinds of names. Like it gets down to really...
I think we need to be careful what we name these things.
And I think intuitively, I mean, even going off the track there with David Pilates' research in the missing 411, he will always warn people when you come across landmarks.
Oh, yeah.
The things like the Devil's Marble, that name is there for a reason.
It's called that for a reason, It
has a history. And isn't that interesting about that corona effect? Because there's some really extraordinary mysteries about our sun and its corona, and the mere fact that it can dispel so much more heat off its planetary body than the planetary body itself contains does not make any form of sense to us from a physicist's perspective. It's really odd, but it's distinctly there. It's a scientific fact. You know what? This has been one of the most...
Hang on, can I just quickly ask, you know when they demoted Pluto from a planet to a, what is it, a dwarf something?
To a dwarf planet.
To a dwarf planet. Did anything happen?
No, as I said, the astrologers just laughed. It's like as if you could demote Pluto. Obviously, you haven't had a Pluto transit and lived through one to tell the tale. You know.
No. Okay. So there was no blowback from Pluto.
Not really. Oh, that's a really great question. I must go back and look at the date of when that happened to see
what happened at the time.
Yeah,
might find something.
Pluto might have got offended by that. Yeah, I was offended. You know, I just thought, how dare you do that? You know.
Well, a lot of people were highly offended. Even children were highly offended.
That's right. I always wondered about what happened when the comet Shoemaker-Levy comet hit Jupiter. And I asked another astrology friend, and she said, "Well, you're a Sagittarius. You tell me. How did you feel?" You know, like, never thought about it that way.
I think there's a very valid point there, especially from a subatomic particle, that we're all connected. I mean, the great late comedian Bill Hicks had that thing is, you know, what are we? I think, therefore I am. We are part of the huge cosmos, philosophically awakening and becoming aware of itself.
Yes.
And I mean, in that sense, and that is a beautiful philosophy to take into life, because it means, therefore, that we all look at all life around us as valuable.
And connected.
We don't try and demean it and harm it. We try and eradicate our narcissism and insecurity and hold everything precious in our heart. And I can see that beautiful relationship you and Sheryl have got, that has got that same synchronicity. It reminds me too of how extraordinary Mariana was at U.F.O Research New South Wales, and how proud she would be of her relationship with you, Sheryl, and what you are doing now. Even though she's not on this heavenly body with us in the physical form, she would be so proud of that friendship, because she used to mention to me, Jamie, there is a wider, more massive phenomena here, and it's on a spiritual basis. And I used to go, God, I need my wife to kick me. I need to start awakening right now.
Oh, you're already awake.
But she always spoke to us about how much you meant to her. And I think you found that relationship yet again with Baboula there. Now, where can people get in touch with you if they want your assistance, Baboula?
Well, my website is my name, baboulaclement.com.au, and I'm also on Facebook as Baboula Clement.
And how do we spell Clement, just in case we slip up on those crib notes?
Clement, no S on the end. People love to put an S on the end.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think I've been doing that to Ross Coulter. I've been putting an S on the end there as well. And Sheryl, they can find you through, yet again?
Through the bodylightcenter.com.
Right.
Okay.
And they can find you through the YouTube channel, U.F.O Research New South Wales, which is one of the greatest Queensland. What am I saying? I'm slipping there.
U.F.O Research Queensland, and the Facebook page, U.F.O Research Queensland.
Yeah. I don't know how we thank you both for your generous spirits and what you've articulated here today. I would like to get you both on with Auburn, the CEO of this incredible app called Randonautica in the States. It's an application that operates off human intention, and it works in with a quantum random number generator and chaos theory. It's based on the theories of Guy Debord from the Situationists International of the 50s, which is all about becoming re-aware of how astounding life and your environment is. She's having some moments. I think she's having a bit of time slippage. I get a feeling Baboula and Sheryl could assist her with that. So I would love to do a podcast with her. She is another beautiful, gentle spirit. And from personal, physical experience, she is a profound female, And I understand from being an insecure, pathetic male that the more profound females I surround myself with, the bearers of life, the better off I am. So, from a very self-indulgent perspective, I'd love to get you back with Orban from Radio Nordica, but we can't thank you enough for your time, your generous spirit, and just the gorgeousness in your heart, ladies. So have a great day, and thank you for being on Down South.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yes, same here.
It's been very, very informative. Very informative. And I hope people, if this piqued your interest, then go along and just do a bit more reading. And this is what I always say to people if I bring up a subject and say to them, do you know anything about this? And they're like, oh no, that's all rubbish, or that's all hokum. And I'm like, oh, how much research and reading have you done into it? And they say none. And I'm like, well, when you do some research and some reading, then we can talk. At the moment, you're just talking from your own closed-minded perspective.
Basically. That's where you're talking from.
You're talking from your own, and you know nothing about it.
And
so we're not even going to
planetary body in the wrong way.
We're not going to discuss it. You know what I mean? So go along and do some reading, and then maybe we'll talk. Anyway, yeah,
exactly.
All right.
Yeah, I feel like crying because you really are incredible emotional power, both of you, and generosity, and we love you deeply for it. So thank you for being with us for company today and enlightenment, and we really appreciate what you're doing, Baboula, and we truly love who you are, Sheryl. So we'll get you back with Orban really soon.
Yeah, that'll be good. All right. Well,
thank you.
Thank you. That was our podcast for this week.
Can we roll down those titles? You're forgetting that. And what did you knit in this time?
Oh no, just, a little bit.
I knew she was knitting.
Yeah, I was knitting just a little square.
Hold it up. I want to see.
You know what? She scares me because she knits. We still DJ out there with vinyl. She'll knit whilst we're DJing.
Okay, so what I'm knitting is squares for. Hang on, I'm doing a. Oh, you can't really. Yeah, so I'm knitting these squares and putting them together. Lovely. Yeah, so I knit a square. I try and knit a square a day. Make a little.
Wow, beautiful.
Anyway, it's all good.
And you know what? She does it for everyone else. And I've got socks here that have been darning for 3 decades, and it's not happening.
Needle and thread, darn your own. What am I, a slave?
No, there's no way that could happen. Believe me.
All right, kids. We will be back next week with another show. But, we enjoyed your company today. And thank you so much, ladies.
Yeah, bless you both.
Thank you.
Take good care.
Bye.
You've been on Down South Anomalies. Doesn't get better than this.
No, it doesn't.